If I get to Europe, will I be able to play with this same information, or will I be able to exchange with this same data? For instance, most of us know in the US, what they rely on mainly for everything they do is a social security number.
Hey, welcome to the Fintech Frontlines by Cora. This podcast is a collection of timeless ideas on how to build, launch, and operate a fintech in Africa from the most experienced minds in African fintech. In this episode, Nelson, Sydney, and Marietta extensively discuss how startups that want to expand outside Africa can deal with global regulatory bodies.
So for this, going to other African countries and also going outside of Africa, one of the first things to have in mind is that it's not a one size fits all. I take a cue from data exchanges. I mean, we know about how the GDPR plays out when it comes to the global. And we also know how the NDPR, we use the Nigerian case, and I'm sure there are similar data protection regulations with different countries of how data are being exchanged. Anyone that is actually going to go to any European or American country vis-a-vis Africa needs to be very particular about what are they saying regarding exchanges of data. What is country A saying? What is country B saying? If I use this information the way I'm using it in Nigeria today, and I'm playing around with that information, if I get to Europe, will I be able to play with this same information, or will I be able to exchange with this same data? For instance, most of us know in the US, what they rely on mainly for everything they do is a social security number. Now, that social security number in Nigerian context is almost like an NIN. But do they tie it to bank transactions the way they do in Nigeria? And how compulsory is it? These are some of the little fine details that we need to be very particular about. In the grand scheme of things, the products will work the same way, but in the little fine details of what differentiates what countries to the other is where that particular cognizance needs to be taken, so as to ensure that while you are launching that product within that country, you're very sure that you are not using or taking it for granted that the way the information is being used in Kenya is the same way to be used in Nigeria, and is the same way it's going to be used in the US or in the UK. So that is just an example to just clarify the way this needs to play out across board in different parts of the world.
So much, Nelson. Sydney, are you ready to go now?
Yes. I think, I think I've touched on this already, at least within Africa. When fintechs startups in general are looking at scaling outside Africa, I think from a risk perspective, I think I think it's very important to note that maybe places like Europe, it's very important to note that there are laws, very specific regulations covering most activities. It's important that you understand what those laws are and how you can comply. Also understand the weight of non-compliance, the risk impact of non-compliance. So I think in the last few years, I've actually gotten to look at a lot of companies, maybe not particularly African startups, while a few foreign companies who have tried to expand within maybe the European market and Asian market have failed from a regulatory perspective. And trust me, it's the regulators in these spaces will typically come down heavy. They will sanction you, they will buy you, and when I'm just talking about the risk impact now. And when they do this, it doesn't just stop at the actual fine you pay. Your name goes into one sanctions list. It's there forever. And anybody that looks you up will always see that you paid a fine or something. So my advice to say fintechs and startups, when you're looking at going outside Africa, understand that there are laws, and these laws are well crafted. It's important to understand what these laws are. And I think the best way to do this is, again, depends on where you are as fintech. So if you really want to scale and you really can't afford somebody who is an expert in any of those jurisdictions you're looking at scaling into, it's important to maybe leverage the ability of the World Wide Web. Find those laws, read them, get people who have proficiency in different aspects. So if you have a product compliance officer, if you have data, get somebody who is good in data and look at it. Again, it ties back to what I said at the initial, I think, first two questions I answered. As you're expanding, the need to have specialized people is very important. Now you could look at outsourcing this and getting a consultant, right? Or you can look at getting people who have specific skill sets based on what you're looking at shipping out. So let's say you want to go into remittance, maybe a repatriating fund to say a country in Asia or maybe in the US. So what exactly would they require in terms of KYC? They need beneficiary details, senders details, what returns. You could actually do a very good job. You have the whole KYC, you follow the limits, and then maybe you didn't know you were supposed to square that particular return, and you'll be fine. And typically these things will affect you. So again, a few businesses will look at this as costs, spending money on compliance. We don't want to get a consultant, you don't want to get a specialist. When you pay the fine, you start piling up. Something that businesses will typically not understand until when they start feeling the impact is reputational risk and reputational damage. Once there is a flag on you, onboarding into people who cheat and adhere to best practices becomes a very difficult situation. So my opinion of fintechs as they move outside Africa is make sure you understand the country you're going to, what laws apply. If your compliance team should be do the tax, you could always look for a consultant or look to hire somebody. The cost of getting a consultant is not more expensive than somebody who has the capacity and the skill set to actually understand what is required from you in the new jurisdiction you're moving into. You might look at that. So organizations are different life segments. So yeah, that's my take.
Thank you so much, Sydney. Marietta, do you have anything to add?
Very quickly to just mention or summarize what the speakers have talked about. To understand that outside of Africa, that there are certain factors that make the levels of compliance arguably higher, the standards of compliance. Those are a strong culture of rule of law, a strong culture of compliance, strong governance and public administration, accountability systems, accessible information that is, made accessible to members of the public, high levels of automation and record keeping, as well as legislation that provides cross-border jurisdiction. So there can be prosecutions in those particular countries for activities that happened outside of those countries, and that increases the level, of accountability. So for example, there can be a corruption scandal that happens in an African country, but because it is a subsidiary of a company registered in the UK, the directors in the UK can be prosecuted for the activity that happened outside of the UK. That's just a general example. So to then appreciate that because there are higher standards, higher accountability, and higher likelihood of running afoul of regulators where mistakes are made, it's important to establish standards that meet, the particular requirements outside of Africa.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the FinTech Frontlines. For businesses that are bullish on Africa, Cora provides all the support you need to start and scale with delightful payment products for collections, payouts, and settlements. Learn more at korahq.com.